A murder, a memory, but she recalls the wrong man. Wolfe doesn't buy it. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Your voices make this journey unforgettable. Let's begin. There's a way things are supposed to happen at Nero Wolfe's brownstone on West 35th Street. You don't ring the bell before noon unless you're delivering something Wolfe can't live without. Beer, books, or beef. You don't wear perfume, strong enough to kill orchids at 50 paces. And you sure as hell don't show up looking like a problem wrapped in desperation with a cherry on top. So when the doorbell buzzed at 10:15 that Tuesday morning, and Fritz was off in the kitchen, humming over a roast that would make grown men weep, it fell to me, Archie Goodwin, to answer it. I was already halfway through my second cup of coffee and a review of last night's Knicks game in the Gazette, so I wasn't exactly thrilled to play butler. The woman standing on the stoop was a small redhead in a pea-green raincoat, even though the sky was dry and the sun was flexing its muscles. She had a battered leather purse clutched under one arm like she expected someone to yank it from her at any second. Her shoes had seen better sidewalks. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, as soon as I cracked the door. "No. Hello. No. May I come in?" Just 2 words and a look that made me itch between my shoulder blades. "Possibly," I said. "But you're facing the janitor. State your name, purpose, and whether you were sent by a lawyer, the police, or a hungry newspaper editor." "I'm Rhonda May. Please, I need to see Mr. Wolfe. It's important. I've been followed." She looked over her shoulder like she expected a goon squad to leap from the azaleas. Normally, the line about being followed would have earned her a friendly pat on the arm and a goodbye, but there was something about the way she said it. Honest panic, not the rehearsed kind. And I've got a soft spot for panicked women who don't know how to lie properly. "Still, house rules are house rules, I'll ask," I said. "You don't smoke, do you?" "No." "Perfume?" "No." I gave her a professional once-over. She looked clean, at least clean enough not to wilt Wolfe's orchids just by breathing. I waved her into the hallway and told her to stand still while I went to risk my life with the boss. Wolfe was in the plant rooms upstairs, inspecting his tropical darlings like a pope doing rounds. He wore a yellow silk shirt that made his complexion look even more like unbaked dough and a scowl that meant business. "Archie," he said without looking at me. "What is it?" "A lady," I said. "Redhead, name of Rhonda May. Claims she's been followed. Wants to see you." He didn't twitch a muscle. Wolfe's personal policy about women is that they are to be avoided until absolutely necessary, like surgery or tax audits. Send her away. Normally I'd be delighted, but she's scared, boss. Not the put-on kind, the genuine article. And if I bounce her and she ends up in a morgue drawer tomorrow morning, it might bruise your sense of culinary enjoyment. He finally turned his head, eyelids drooping in irritation. Pfui. Emotional blackmail. Would I do that? Constantly. "Bring her in, to the office." I nodded and went back down, resisting the urge to whistle. The brownstone was already disturbed, and the door had barely opened. When I led Rhonda May into the office, she hesitated on the threshold. Most people do. Something about Wolfe's room, the walls of books, the heavy air, the great man himself in his custom-built chair, mountainous and motionless, has a way of making newcomers think twice about their decisions. Wolfe barely glanced. Up from the orchid catalogue he was pretending to read. "Miss May," he said, "state your trouble briefly and precisely." She gulped and clutched her purse tighter. "It's not trouble yet. It's a mistake," she said. "A mistake I made a week ago. I told a lie about something I saw. I didn't think it mattered. But now somebody thinks it matters a lot, and I think they're going to kill me for it." I leaned against the wall and crossed my arms, watching Wolfe's face. No reaction, naturally. Wolfe shows less emotion than a corpse in cold storage. And, Wolfe said mildly, what, pray, was the lie? She hesitated, glanced at me, then back at Wolfe. I said I didn't recognize a man, but I did. I knew exactly who he was. I lied because I thought it was harmless. He was sitting at table 3, at the diner where I work. And now, she broke off, hands shaking. Wolfe closed the orchid catalogue with a snap. This is intolerably vague, he said. You came here because you believe your falsehood endangered your life? Yes, she said. I need help. I can pay. I care nothing for your purse, Wolfe interrupted. Money is a necessity, not a seduction. What matters is whether your case offends me. She blinked, lost. I despise disorder, Wolfe said, voice heavy with the weight of pronouncement. Falsity breeds disorder. You're either a fool or a miscreant, however. He paused, studying her like a chessboard. For reasons that will remain my own for now, I will hear the full particulars. Archie, get the notebook. On it, I said. And, just like that, the game had begun. You don't need a brass band to know when the brownstone's piece has been wrecked. A shift in Wolfe's breathing. The way Fritz clatters a little harder in the kitchen, even the orchids seem to sag. By the time I had Rhonda May perched on the red leather client's chair in front of Wolfe's desk, the brownstone had gone from fortress to battlefield. She sat primly, ankles crossed, wringing the strap of her purse. Wolfe leaned back in his oversized throne, fingertips pressed together under his chin, his eyelids drooping to half-mast in what looked like a coma, but was actually his version of loaded combat readiness. I clicked my pen and opened the notebook. Begin at the beginning, Wolfe said. Who was the man you recognized? Rhonda swallowed hard. His name is, well, I think it's Victor Talbot. Wolfe lifted one finger, a small but deadly gesture. You think? I know, she said. I knew him 3 years ago. He used to come into the diner, always sat at the counter, told me his name once. And why? Wolfe murmured. Did you claim otherwise? Rhonda hesitated. Because it didn't seem important. The police came after. The robbery, asking questions. I panicked. I didn't want to get involved. Robbery, I cut in. What robbery? Rhonda gave me a miserable glance. At the diner last Thursday night, right after I got off my shift, somebody broke in through the back door, stole the night's take. About $5 grand. And Victor Talbot was seen there before the heist. She nodded. He was sitting in a booth for hours, nursing coffee. I served him myself. But when the cops asked if I recognized anyone suspicious, she flushed. I said no. Wolfe shifted his bulk and exhaled through his nose, a sound like an overworked radiator. And now you are followed. Yes, her voice dropped. Twice in the last 2 days. A man in a dark car parked across from my apartment, someone behind me on the subway platform. I don't know if it's Talbot or someone he knows, but I'm scared. Wolfe's lips compressed. He hated fear. It complicated things, cluttered facts with emotion. So you should have gone to the police, he said. I can't. Her hands twisted in her lap. If they find out I lied, they'll think I was in on it. I'll lose my job, my apartment, everything. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, as if praying for patience. Archie, he said, get her address. I scribbled it down. 408 East 84th Street, Apt 3B, phone number. She gave it. Employer? Glennie's Diner on Lexington near 78th. Wolfe tapped a finger on the desk, a slow, deliberate rhythm. Miss May, you will return to your dwelling and proceed as if nothing has changed. You will be observed, for your protection and for information gathering. You will not lie again. Any deviation will terminate our involvement. Clear? Clear, she whispered. Good. Archie? Got it, I said. Shadow duty. I shall dispatch you. Shortly. For now, see Miss May to the door. I stood, offering Rhonda a hand up. She was trembling, but she managed a faint smile. "Thank you," she said. I wasn't sure whether she meant Wolfe, me, or the brownstone itself. As I ushered her to the door, I heard Wolfe buzzing Fritz in the kitchen, no doubt to arrange another interruption to lunch. When I returned, Wolfe was already composing the next moves in that big egg of his. "Archie, Saul Panzer is to be engaged." "Sure," I grabbed the phone. "If you're serious about being tailed and not dead, you hire Saul. And," Wolfe said, "bring Mr. Kramer to mind." I paused, hand on the receiver. "Kramer? Already? He will smell—" "It's soon enough. Better to have him irritated early than enraged late." I grinned. "You're feeling almost adventurous." He grunted, which in wolf speak was practically a rebel yell. As I dialed Saul, I felt it. The unmistakable buzz that meant the brownstone's sanctity had been cracked open, and what had slipped in wasn't just fear or lying redheads or robberies. It was something worse, something personal, and it was just getting started, absolutely. Here's the command again for clarity before I begin. Saul Panzer made his appearance at the brownstone by 1:15, right on the dot. Fritz, who treats outside visitors with the same warmth he'd reserved for a termite inspection team, handed Saul over to me in the hall like a package he couldn't wait to be rid of. I took him into the office, where Wolfe barely nodded acknowledgement before diving into the facts. After 15 minutes of laying out Rhonda May's tangle, Saul lifted one eyebrow about a quarter-inch. For him, an emotional outburst. "You want me on her full-time?" he asked. "Tonight and tomorrow," Wolfe said. "Discreet surveillance, her residence, her employment. If she is approached, record it. If she is attacked, prevent it without entanglement with the police." Saul grunted. "Usual rates?" "Plus a bonus for rapid delivery," Wolfe said, which was Wolf speak for, "This smells worse than it looks." When Saul left, I hit the street, tasked with step 2 of Wolfe's battle plan. Find out just how muddy Rhonda's boots were and where the other tracks led. My first stop was Glennie's Diner, a narrow, chrome-lined slice of 1950s Americana wedged between a hardware store and a pawn shop. The bell over the door jangled when I pushed inside. The smell was a punch in the nose. Scorched coffee, fryer grease, and something approximating apple pie if you squinted. A blonde behind the counter, maybe 23 if you counted the nights, leaned forward with professional disinterest. Name tag. "Gina." "Help you?" "Coffee," I said. "Black." And a little conversation. She gave me a once-over that said she had filed men like me under time wasters years ago. Still, she poured the coffee. "I'm looking for information about a waitress who works here. Rhonda May." Her hands stiffened on the coffee pot. "Rhonda's not in today. I know, I'm not her uncle and I'm not selling insurance. I'm just trying to find out what kind of trouble she might be in." "Trouble?" she said too fast. "She's not in trouble." "Sure she is. The question is, who else is?" Gina pressed her lips together. Behind her, a big man in a paper hat flipped burgers with more aggression than necessary. I clocked him as someone to come back to. "She's good people," Gina said finally. "Always showed up, worked her shifts, didn't steal tips. That's more than you can say for half the jerks around here." "Like who?" She hesitated, then shrugged, like she didn't care. "Guy. Named Lou. Lou Lemke, used to run the register. Got canned 6 weeks ago for pocketing 20s. Had a thing for Rhonda, too. Romantic thing," she snorted. "Romantic like a hammer. He followed her around like a puppy with a crowbar. I filed that under likely suspects." "What about Victor Talbot?" I asked casually. Her reaction was pure Hollywood. A blink, a fake laugh, a nervous hair toss. She should have gotten an Oscar for most suspicious diner waitress. Never heard of him. "Of course not," I said cheerfully, dropping a buck on the counter. "Thanks for the coffee." Outside, I leaned against a lamppost and thought it through. So far we had Victor Talbot, ex-diner haunt, Probable bad news. Lou Lemke, disgruntled former employee with both motive and temperament. Gina, whose poker face was about as good as a busted screen door. And maybe the burger flipper. If his spatula skills extended to heavier weapons, a neat little circle of opportunity, resentment and fear, Wolfe would want the full deck. Next, I paid a visit to Lou Lemke himself. According to a little bribery at the hardware store next to Glennie's, Lou was now pulling graveyard shifts as a night guard for a parking garage on 2nd Avenue. I caught him on his lunch break, sitting in a folding chair under a bare bulb, working. Through a meatball sub with the same tenderness you'd use to dismantle a chair. Lou Lemke was a block of man. Wide forehead, suspicious little eyes, hands like ham hocks. When I introduced myself, he wiped his mouth on his sleeve and said, "What do you want?" Conversation. About Rhonda May. Instant frost. He stood up, and the chair squeaked in pain. "So I ain't talked to Rhonda in months." "Funny," I said, "because some folks say you used to talk to her plenty." He stepped closer. I caught a whiff of onions and trouble. "I didn't do nothing to Rhonda. I liked her, okay? But she—" He clamped his mouth shut. "But she didn't like you." He glared. "She didn't have to. I ain't a creep." I let that one pass. "You know Victor Talbot?" I asked. The reaction was immediate. Lou's face went blank, like a dropped curtain. "Nope." "Liar," I said pleasantly. "And a bad one." His fists balled, but he checked himself. Maybe the night shift uniform had drilled a little restraint into him. "He used to come around," Lou said grudgingly. "Big spender, flash guy. Always thought he was better'n the rest of us." "And you thought?" Otherwise, Lou shrugged. "I thought he was a phony. Looked the part, talked the part, but no guts." "Where is he now?" "How the hell would I know?" "Good question. One I'd be trying to answer soon enough." I left Lou glowering in the garage and headed back uptown. The sky had turned a nasty shade of nickel gray, promising rain. By the time I hit the brownstone stoop, my feet ached and my coat was collecting droplets. Inside, Wolfe was in the office, of course. I dumped my notes onto his desk. "You've got a tight little drama shaping up," I said. "Love, jealousy, theft, and a whole lot of lying." He grunted. "And," I added, "at least 3 people who reacted to Victor Talbot's name like I'd shoved a snake down their shirts." "Phooey," Wolfe said. "Predictable." He leaned forward, tapping a finger against the blotter. "We must now consider," he said, "whether Miss May's error was one of omission or commission." I frowned. "You think she was in on it?" "I think it is imprudent to trust anyone who has demonstrated a willingness to lie for convenience." Point to Wolfe. Just then the phone rang. I grabbed it. Archie Goodwin, Wolfe's residence. It was Saul Panzer, cool and calm as always. "Archie," he said, "you were right to move fast. Our Miss May isn't alone tonight. She's got company, a man." "Describe." "Medium height, grey suit, black hair, mustache. Sitting in a car across from her building, pretending to read a newspaper." "Recognize him?" "No." "Want me to approach?" I covered the mouthpiece and looked at Wolfe. He shook his head. "No," I told Saul. "Stay on her. Call if he makes a move." When I hung up, Wolfe shifted his bulk in the chair. "It begins," he said softly. And he was right. The game had moved from whispers to pieces shifting on the board. All we had to do was survive long enough to call checkmate. When Wolfe uses that tone, the soft, heavy one, it means he smells an outcome. Not sees, not knows, but smells it, like a bloodhound given a sniff of somebody's shirt. I wasn't quite there yet. My nose said trouble, but the direction the wind was blowing still wasn't clear. Around 9 o'clock that night, Wolfe called me into the office again. He was at his desk with a bottle of beer opened and 3 of his favorite pens lined up like soldiers. "Archie, attend her," meaning Rhonda. meaning Saul's surveillance detail just became a two-man operation with me in the field. He flicked a hand. I do not trust the delicacy of the situation to mere relaying. See for yourself. I saluted and went out into the dark. Rhonda's place was a brown brick nothing special walk-up on East 84th, sandwiched between a dry cleaner's and a nail salon that had gone out of business 2 months back, but still had a neon open sign buzzing faintly in the window. I spotted Saul 2 doors down, lounging behind the wheel of a battered Buick he liked to use when he didn't want to be noticed. He didn't get out, just gave me a flick of his fingers across the dash. Across the street, the grey-suited man with the mustache was still parked, still pretending to read a newspaper by the dim dome light. "Update?" I murmured when I leaned into Saul's window. "Nothing yet. He's been there since 7. No move. Toward the building, just watching. Anyone else?" "Negative," I nodded. "Stay close. If he follows her, I'll take the tag." Saul gave the tiniest of grins, the Panzer version of a battle cry, and I crossed the street. Rhonda lived on the 3rd floor, no elevator. I took the stairs 2 at a time, light on my feet. Outside 3B, I rapped gently. A moment later, she cracked the door. She was still in her diner uniform, sneakers kicked off, hair loose around her shoulders. Her face was tight. "Mr. Goodwin, Archie, I'm here to make sure you don't wake up dead. May I?" She let me in. The apartment was clean but bare, second-hand. Couch, coffee table with a nicked corner. A few framed photos on the wall. Mostly old family shots that looked like they hadn't been dusted off in a while. "I haven't seen anything," she said, voice low. "But I feel..." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. "Pack a bag," I said. She blinked. "You're moving into safer territory for a night or 2. Wolfe's orders." She hesitated. "But I have..." "Work. Call out sick. Tell him you have a fever and move it, sweetheart. We're not debating." 5 minutes later, we were heading down the stairs, Rhonda clutching a beat-up suitcase like a life preserver. Outside, Saul gave the all-clear signal. 2 blinks of the Buick's headlights. But Grey Suit saw us too. I didn't need a second look to know it. He folded his paper and started his engine. "Trouble," I muttered to Rhonda. "Stay close." I hustled her into the waiting cab Saul had flagged just up the street. As we pulled away, I caught Grey Suit's car easing out from the curb in the mirror. "Perfect, driver," I said, flashing a bill. "Take a right, then another right, nice and slow." He didn't argue. New York cabbies are used to weird orders after dark. Sure enough, the grey sedan followed, keeping a car's length behind. "Good," I said softly. "Very good." At the next red light, I told Rhonda to duck down in her seat. "Why?" "Because," I said, "if he sees you, he might lose his nerve. We want him confident." Obediently, she slid down. When we hit 79th Street, I spotted my chance, a narrow alleyway between a bakery and a locksmith. "Here," I barked at the driver. "Turn sharp." He almost did a donut, bless him, and screeched us into the alley. I tossed a 20 at him, hauled Rhonda out and flattened her against the brick. 10 seconds later, Grey Suit's sedan whooshed by, missing us. I peeked around the corner. He kept going, oblivious. "Okay," I said. "Move." We made our way on foot, Rhonda panting from nerves until we reached a more respectable avenue. Then I called Saul to confirm. "Grey Suit's still circling," Saul said. "You shook him." "Good. I'm taking the package back to the brownstone." "Copy." Rhonda spent the night in one of the guest rooms upstairs, with Fritz hovering around like a worried mother hen. Wolfe didn't so much as twitch about the disruption, meaning he considered the move necessary. Meanwhile, I dug in deeper on our suspects. The next morning, while Rhonda holed up upstairs, I worked the phone. First, the NYPD a favor from an old buddy at the precinct got me the skinny. Victor Talbot had a sheet, petty larceny, fraud, and 1 dismissed assault charge. No convictions, but the guy was no Eagle Scout. Better yet, 3 years ago, Talbot had been involved in a robbery scheme that had all the hallmarks of Glennie's diner job. Wait for the closing shift, slip in through the back, grab the night's cash. He'd gotten off on a technicality. Second, I ran a background check on Lou Lemke. Nothing criminal beyond a few bar fights and a suspended license, but the guy had temper issues coming out his ears. Gina the waitress. Spotty employment record. Fired twice for personality conflicts. Translation: she didn't play nice. And then, a cherry on top, Saul reported that Victor Talbot's last known address was in Queens, but he hadn't been seen there in over 2 weeks. In other words, he'd gone ghost. When I dropped all this, into Wolfe's lap around noon, he steepled his fingers and smiled that small, cold smile that always means somebody's going to regret underestimating him. "Excellent," he said. "We are close." Close to what? To understanding why Miss May lied and for whom. And when we know that, Wolfe opened his eyes, bright as a hawk's. Then, "Archie, we shall expose the disease by forcing the symptoms into the open." "Sounds hygienic," I said. "How?" But Wolfe just sipped his beer and smiled wider. Trust Wolfe to treat a death threat and a robbery like a particularly tough crossword puzzle, and trust me to be the one doing the fieldwork to fill in the missing words. If there's a sin worse than lying in Wolfe's world, it's touching things that aren't yours, and especially in the brownstone. Disruption might be tolerated under extreme circumstances, but tampering? That was war. It was Fritz who noticed it first. Around 3 that afternoon, when I was elbow-deep in background checks on Talbot's old associates, Fritz came gliding into the office. Normally, Fritz moves like a man carrying soup on a tightrope. That afternoon, his shoes actually made noise. Against the floorboards, Wolfe, who was halfway through his 3rd bottle of Remmer's imported beer, lifted a brow. "Mr. Wolfe," Fritz said, voice tight enough to cut glass, "the spice cabinet has been rearranged. If you don't understand the gravity of that statement, let me paint it for you. Wolfe's spice cabinet is his holy of holies. Every jar in alphabetical A. Order, each labeled in German, French, and Latin, and each with a designated place measured down to the 1/4 inch. Wolfe lowered his beer with ominous slowness. "Rearranged," he said. "Yes, sir, the jar of marjoram has been shifted to the 2nd shelf, and the coriander has been—" Fritz swallowed, actually swallowed. "Opened." Silence. I glanced at Wolfe. He hadn't moved, but the temperature in the room dropped 5 degrees. Fritz, usually a mountain of dignity, actually wrung his hands. "I swear, sir, it was correct this morning." Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "Archie." "Yeah, boss?" "Ascertain." That was Wolfe's version of DEFCON 1. I trotted to the kitchen with Fritz hurrying along behind. The spice cabinet looked normal to the average eye. To Wolfe's and Fritz's, it might as well have been a ransacked safe. I crouched, inspecting the shelves. Sure enough, a faint ring of powder outlined where one jar had been nudged out of place. The coriander jar had a smear across. The glass not from kitchen use. Fritz handles those jars like they're crown jewels are, but from clumsy fingers. "Looks like somebody fumbled it," I said. "But who?" Fritz demanded. "Only you, Mr. Wolfe, and myself go into the kitchen." "And Miss May," I said slowly. Fritz looked wounded, like I'd kicked his favorite souffle. "She asked only for tea. She did not touch the spice cabinet." I stood up, brushing my hands. "We're not dealing with logic, Fritz. We're dealing with human beings." Back in the office, I gave Wolfe the rundown. He listened without interrupting, face blank. "Someone tampered," he said when I finished. "But not for seasoning. Then for what? To search." That ticked something in the back of my mind. I pulled out my notebook. What would anybody expect to find in a jar of coriander? "Nothing," Wolfe said, voice glacial. "Which is precisely why it is alarming." He thought a moment, then jabbed a finger at me. "Who was in the kitchen Today? I counted off. You, me, Fritz, and Rhonda. And yesterday? Same, minus Rhonda. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Miss May has been alone here, I thought. For about 15 minutes this morning, when Fritz was picking up milk and I was making calls. Pfui, Wolfe said. Unacceptable. He picked up the phone and barked Saul Panzer's number at me. I dialed. When Saul answered, Wolfe didn't waste. A second, Mr. Panzer. I require observation within the brownstone, covert. Saul being Saul didn't ask why, he just grunted and said, Tonight? Tonight. Wolfe hung up and steepled his fingers again. Archie. Until Saul arrives, Miss May is not to be left unobserved. Babysitting duty? Precisely. And what if she resents the attention? Then she is welcome to depart, permanently. Wolfe's tone made it clear he didn't care if Rhonda packed up and ran screaming down 35th Street. In fact, he might have preferred it. That evening I camped in the front room, a magazine on my lap and a gun within easy reach under a cushion. Rhonda stayed mostly in her room, only emerging once to ask if she could borrow a book. I gave her a copy of Jane Eyre from Wolfe's lending shelf. Figured it was safer than letting her roam the library, and possibly boost a first edition. Around 9, Saul slipped into the house, using the kitchen door, wearing the same grey workman's uniform. He used for sneaking around dignitaries' mansions during surveillance gigs. He was a ghost, silent, invisible, deadly if needed. From then on we had eyes on every movement in the brownstone, without letting the mark know. Rhonda didn't do anything suspicious that night. She read, drank tea Fritz grudgingly provided, and went to bed early. But around 1:30 in the morning, while Saul was monitoring from the second-floor hallway, she made a move. Saul reported it in a whisper over the office extension. She tried the kitchen again. Looking for tea? No, went straight to the spice cabinet. I relayed the info to Wolfe, who merely nodded, unsurprised. Was she carrying anything? Wolfe asked. Looked like a paper scrap. She tucked it inside her bra after. Wolfe shut his eyes again, a sign that he was drawing threads together. When morning came, Rhonda played it casual at breakfast. I watched her over coffee while Fritz plunked down scrambled eggs like they were subpoenas. She smiled, made small, talk, and even asked if she could call her manager at Glennie's to check in. Wolfe permitted it, from the office extension, with me sitting 3 feet away. Nothing suspicious there. Just a quick nervous check-in to say she was still sick, but recovering. When she hung up, Wolfe invited her to sit in the office. She did, perched at the edge of the red client chair again, her suitcase from yesterday still sitting in the hall like an accusing finger. Wolfe leaned back in his chair and regarded her without warmth. "Miss May," he said, "what were you seeking in the spice cabinet last night?" The effect was instantaneous. Rhonda paled, her lips parting in shock. I don't know what you mean." Wolfe sighed like a teacher confronting a particularly dull pupil. "I will ask once more. What were you seeking?" "I wasn't, Miss May," Wolfe said, his voice slicing through her protest. "You may recover your honesty or your liberty. Choose." She sagged, the fight draining out of her. She stammered. "I hid something." "Continue." "A note," she whispered. "From Victor." Wolfe's nostrils flared. "When did you hide it?" "The first night," she said. "When I first came here, I thought if someone broke in, they'd search my things. But they wouldn't. Think to look in a spice jar. And why?" Wolfe said, each word slow and deliberate. "Did you not tell me?" "I was scared," she said. I thought if you knew, you'd send me away." Her eyes were shining now, pleading. I wasn't buying, but Wolfe didn't need my judgment. He sat still for a long moment, Archie. Retrieved the coriander jar. I went, found it, and handed it over. Wolfe unscrewed the lid delicately like diffusing a bomb. Inside, rolled tight, was a piece of paper. He unrolled it carefully. It was a note, all right. One line, scrawled in a hurried hand. "They know. Run." Fast Wolfe read it twice, then laid it on the desk with a little puff of air from his nose. "Miss May," he said, voice calm, "you are either very foolish or very dangerous." She wilted. I didn't know which yet, but Wolfe would. By mid-morning the next day, the brownstone had the emotional temperature of a pressure cooker with the lid jammed on. Wolfe, after extracting the hidden note from the coriander jar, ordered Rhonda back to her guest room and declared the office off-limits to her, Fritz, and anyone without explicit permission. Saul Panzer continued his silent sentry work around the place, a ghost among shadows. I made coffee strong enough to peel paint and sat opposite Wolfe, who hadn't moved except to tap one meaty finger against the armrest at steady intervals like a metronome. It was his version of sprinting laps. "Thoughts?" I prompted after my third cup. "Plenty," Wolfe said. "Chiefly that Miss May is more dangerous by her omissions than her actions." "Meaning?" "Meaning she knows more than she admits," he said, "and either lacks the wit to see it or the courage to reveal it." I leaned back. Could be both. He inclined his head slightly in agreement. At that moment the phone rang. Fritz answered and called out, "Inspector Kramer for Mr. Wolfe." "Oh, good. Just what we needed. A grumpy city cop to stir the pot even harder." Wolfe grunted. "Put him through." A moment later, Inspector Kramer's voice barked across the line like a saw through wet wood. "Wolfe, you sitting on something?" "Good morning, Inspector," Wolfe said silkily. "What can I do for you?" "You can tell me why Victor Talbot's name is floating back up to the top of my desk blotter when I thought he was under a rock somewhere." Wolfe smiled faintly. I could tell by the way his lips twitched. "I have no notion, Inspector, but I may be able to assist in clarifying matters." "You better," Kramer growled, "because Talbot's name just came up in connection with the second robbery, a jewelry store in the Bronx. Same MO as that diner cash grab." That got my attention. "Victor Talbot," Kramer went on, "was spotted 2 days ago in a neighborhood bar across from the diner you're babysitting somebody from. And guess what? The bartender said he was flashing a wad big enough to rent Yankee Stadium for a weekend." "Interesting," Wolfe said, managing to make it sound like hearing about his own funeral. "It gets better," Kramer said grimly. "This morning, the jewelry store's night manager turns up dead. Shot behind the counter, execution style." Dead silence. Kramer didn't bother to fill it. He knew Wolfe would process it faster than any of us could. "Inspector," Wolfe said, voice colder than the marble on his front steps, "you must proceed according to your duty. I am proceeding according to mine." "You better not be hiding anything, Wolfe." "Pfui. I am preserving an endangered species. Truth." Kramer hung up without saying goodbye, which was practically a handshake from him. I set my coffee down. "Well, that escalated." "It did," Wolfe said. "Now matters are urgent." Before I could ask how urgent, the doorbell rang. Twice, short and sharp. Fritz was busy in the kitchen prepping lunch, so I went to get it. It was Gina, the blonde waitress from Glenny's, and she looked about 10 minutes from a breakdown. She was wearing jeans, a wrinkled sweatshirt, and panic. "Mr. Goodwin," she gasped. "I need to see him now." I stepped aside and let her in, leading her toward the office. Wolfe looked up, eyebrows lifting a quarter inch. "This," I said, "is Gina, from Glenny's." "I know who she is," Wolfe said. "Miss, state your urgency." Gina clutched her purse to her chest. "I didn't know where else to go. I'm scared. Somebody's been calling me." Calling? Anonymous. No voice. Just breathing. And once they left a note at my door. She fumbled into her purse and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. I took it from her and flattened it. "Keep quiet or end quietly." Neat printed letters. No fingerprints visible without a lab. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Miss," he said, "you know something material to Victor Talbot's enterprises?" She shook her head wildly. "No, I swear I didn't even recognize him at first. Not until the cops came asking." "Yet you did not volunteer the identification?" "No, I was scared." Wolfe tapped his fingertips together. "You have reason to fear now because you withheld truth then." She started crying. Not loud, messy crying, but silent, miserable tears that leaked down her cheeks. "Archie," Wolfe said, "you will accompany Miss Gina to the front room. Comfort her, briefly." Translation: "Get her calm, but don't waste time." I steered her out and plopped her into one of the heavy chairs near the front window, offering her a handkerchief. She took it and sobbed into it. When I came back, Wolfe was dictating a list of names into the notepad. "Fast for him, Archie. Compile dossiers, Victor Talbot's known associates. Focus on those with experience in violence. On it. And call Saul. Double surveillance on Miss May and now Miss Gina." "Will do." The net was widening. Fast. That night, just after dinner, which none of us enjoyed, including Wolfe, who poked at his veal shank like it had insulted him personally, the next hammer fell. While Fritz and I cleared dishes, Wolfe retired to the plant rooms upstairs for his ritual evening communion with the orchids. The brownstone, for once, was almost quiet, too quiet. At exactly 8:20 p.m. I heard it, a muffled crash from the front hallway. I sprinted out of the kitchen, gun already halfway drawn. The front door hung open, swinging gently on its hinges. A man in a black coat was halfway down the stoop, sprinting toward a waiting car. I bolted after him but didn't get farther than the first step before he dove into the passenger seat and the car roared off, tires screaming. "Archie!" Wolfe bellowed from upstairs. "I'm fine," I shouted back, checking for damage. It didn't take long. The only thing missing from the front hallway was Rhonda May's battered suitcase. She had left it by the door that morning when Wolfe told her she wouldn't be needing it yet. Apparently someone else needed it more, or thought something important was hidden inside it. By 9 p.m. the brownstone had fully transformed from fortress to war room. Fritz double-checked the locks. Saul Panzer posted himself at the kitchen door with a new angle on the street, and Wolfe, seated behind his massive desk, began to work like an artilleryman plotting bombardment. The theft of Rhonda's suitcase was no small matter. Wolfe treated it like a battle flag torn from our walls. Someone had risked a full frontal assault on Wolfe's sacred ground. That wasn't just desperation. It was either stupidity or profound confidence. Rhonda May, for her part, sat white-faced and trembling on the red leather client's chair again, reduced from panicked fugitive to broken witness. Gina huddled opposite her, sniffling. Not much better off. Wolfe watched them both, unmoving. When he finally spoke, the words were precise as a scalpel. "Miss May, Miss Gina. We are now well past the time for selective honesty." They both flinched. Like schoolgirls caught forging permission slips. "Victor Talbot," Wolfe said, "was not alone in his schemes. You know this. Yet you have omitted names, facts, connections." "No," Rhonda burst out. "I swear I don't know anything else." "You lie poorly," Wolfe said flatly. "Better you save your energy." He turned his gaze to Gina, who shrank 2 inches. "Into the chair, Miss Gina." She twisted her hands. I just... Enough." Wolfe exhaled through his nose. "Archie." "Sir?" "Call Saul. Bring Mr. Fred Durkin and Mr. Ori Cather here. Tonight." I raised a brow. "A full parade?" Wolfe's smile was wintry. "If someone insists on challenging my sovereignty, I shall respond in kind." When Wolfe wheels out Saul, Fred, and Ori all at once, it's equivalent to calling the National Guard. Saul Panzer is the best operative in the city. Fred Durkin looks like a plodding ox, but has the instincts of a bloodhound. And Ori Cather, well, Ori could charm a nun into confessing arson. Within the hour they were seated in the office, looking alert and faintly dangerous. Wolfe outlined the situation in clean, brutal strokes. A suitcase has been stolen, likely believing it contained evidence or leverage. Fred grunted. "Or ransom material. Or to silence someone," Ori added grimly. "Precisely," Wolfe said. He turned to me. "Archie, Provide physical descriptions of all those connected to Miss May's and Talbot's circumstances. I rattled off. Quick sketches of Lou Lemke, Gina, the grey suit man who'd tailed Rhonda, and any others we had orbiting the mess. Wolfe assigned the hunt like a general distributing divisions. Mr. Panzer, shadow Lou Lemke discreetly. Mr. Durkin, find the grey-suited man, use the plates Archie recorded. Mr. Cather, revisit Glennie's diner, watch, listen, elicit. Ori grinned wolfishly. Understood. And Archie, still here, boss. You will remain here. To guard Miss May and Miss Gina, and, he added, stabbing a finger toward Rhonda, to observe. Rhonda paled further. When the three operatives dispersed, the brownstone settled into a kind of anticipatory silence. Around 10:30, the first report came in. Saul called in. Lou Lemke had been spotted arguing outside a dive bar near 3rd Avenue. Nothing unusual except for the company. He was with a thin, rat-faced man who, when described, matched the grey suit almost exactly, minus the Sunday manners. Better yet, Saul had managed to snap a photo with his miniature camera. He promised to deliver it personally in the morning. At 11:15, Fred Durkin called. The grey sedan that had tailed Rhonda was found, abandoned under the Queensborough Bridge. Cleaned out, wiped down, professionals at work, and just past midnight Ori called. I got something, he said in a whisper. Talk. Manager at Glennie's, Jack Varden, knows more than he's letting on. Guy's sweating bullets. I bought him 3 bourbons, and he started muttering about promises made, promises broken. Said Rhonda and Talbot had a deal nobody was supposed to find out about. My eyebrows shot up. What kind of deal? Didn't say. Varden sobered up fast. When I pressed, I relayed all of it to Wolfe as he sat behind his desk, sipping beer as if it was communion wine. Wolfe listened, then nodded once. All of it converges, he said, toward Miss May. I glanced at Rhonda, asleep now in the client's chair, her head tilted against the wingback and a blanket draped over her knees. She looked harmless, pathetic even, but Wolfe's instincts weren't wrong often. He turned his cold gaze to me. Tomorrow, Archie, he said, we summon them. All of them? All of them. Lou Lemke, Gina, Jack Varden, and Miss May. And Talbot. If he can be found, Wolfe said grimly. Or what remains of him. There was no drama in the way he said it. Just a simple statement of probabilities. And, he added, prepare for duplicity. They will not confess easily. They never do. Wolfe's smile was thin as a razor's edge. We shall apply persuasion, of the intellectual sort. He leaned back, steepled his fingers, and closed his eyes. An engine of thought idling in the gloom. The next morning, Saul, Fred, and Ori reassembled at the brownstone for final instructions. Kramer hadn't stormed the gates yet, but it was only a matter of time. Saul handed over the snapshot of Lou and Ratface. Wolfe studied it, nodded, and tucked it into his personal file drawer. Invitations, meaning barely civil summons, went out by hand delivery to Lou Lemke, Gina, and Jack Varden, requesting their presence at Wolfe's office at 4 p.m. sharp. That gave them enough time to get scared, stew, maybe even make mistakes. When Fritz served an early lunch, Wolfe pushed, "It aside untouched. Archie Goodwin here. Let me assure you that's when you know the world is officially ending. Nero Wolfe skipping a meal voluntarily is like Niagara Falls deciding it's thirsty." At 2 o'clock sharp, Wolfe rose from his chair and announced to the room, "Today," he said, "we bait the trap, and hope the mice nibble," I said. He gave me one of his rare, genuine smiles. "Archie, they already have, of course. Following exactly as you requested. If you've never seen Nero Wolfe conduct an office gathering, you're missing out on one of life's finer, bloodless massacres. It's like watching a python wait for rabbits to hop into its mouth. No shouting, no smashing furniture, just polite words, heavy silences, and the kind of psychological tension that could make a mob boss confess to stealing lunch money in second grade. At precisely 4 p.m., Fritz ushered our guests into the office. Lou Lemke, looking sweaty and belligerent in a jacket 2 sizes too small. Gina, shifting from foot to foot like she was dying for a cigarette. And Jack Varden, the manager from Glennie's Diner, whose shiny forehead glistened under the office lights. Rhonda May was already there, perched again in the red chair with a kind of battered dignity, a handkerchief crumpled in her lap. Was standing by the wall, notebook in hand, a loaded pencil in my breast pocket, just in case a real weapon became necessary. Wolfe sat behind his desk, massive and immovable, his yellow silk pajamas peeking out from under his brown robe as if he couldn't be bothered dressing for the occasion. His eyes, half-lidded, missed nothing. Fritz closed the door quietly. "Be seated," Wolfe said. They found chairs. Lou wedged into one like he was about to split it down the seams, Gina folding herself neatly onto the edge, Jack Varden slumping low, hands clasped tightly between his knees. Wolfe let the silence stretch like an executioner sharpening his axe. "You are here," he said finally, "because of Miss May." All 3 sets of eyes shot to her. Miss May, Wolfe continued, was involved, wittingly or not, in a conspiracy that began with simple theft and has since escalated to threats, violence, and murder. Jack Varden flinched. Lou scowled harder. Gina made a soft sound, half sob, half curse. "I will not waste your time or mine with florid accusations," Wolfe said. "You will speak, fully, truthfully, or you will suffer consequences worse than legal action. You will incur my personal wrath. For those who don't know, that's not just bombast. Wolfe's personal wrath usually results in careers ending, reputations imploding, and sometimes quiet trips out of town to live under new names." He turned to Lou Lemke first. "Mr. Lemke, did you steal Miss May's suitcase?" Lou blustered. Opened his mouth and shut it again. Wolfe waited, patient as a glacier. "I didn't steal nothing," Lou muttered finally. I thought she had something from Vic, something that could get me in trouble." "What precisely?" Lou stared at his fists. "I don't know, a ledger maybe, a list of people. Associates?" Lou nodded once. Wolfe leaned back. "How did you learn of its existence?" Lou flicked a glance at Jack Varden. "That, my friends, was the beginning of the end." Wolfe saw it, of course. "Mr. Varden," Wolfe said, "your involvement." Varden licked his lips. "I didn't steal anything. You merely arranged for others to do so." Jack Varden wilted. "Look, it wasn't supposed to get messy. It was just about the money." Wolfe's voice was soft, deadly. "Explain." Varden slumped lower. "Vic Talbot. He promised to cut me in. Small stuff. Skimming from the diner, a few side deals. Wasn't supposed to know about the jewelry store job, and yet you did." "I figured it out," Varden muttered. "When the heat came down after the diner robbery, I panicked. I told Lou—" He jerked a thumb at Lemke. "That if Vic got caught, he'd drag us all down. We had to cover our tracks by intimidating witnesses." "Yeah," Varden said miserably. "Rhonda knew Vic. She could ID him. If the cops pressed her, she'd roll over." Wolfe's gaze moved to Gina. "Miss Gina?" She shook her head fiercely. "I didn't want no part of it. They told me to keep quiet, that's all. Just pretend I didn't recognize Vic." "You complied." "I was scared." Wolfe nodded as if granting her a passing grade in basic cowardice. Then he turned his full attention to Rhonda, Miss May. Her fingers knotted the handkerchief tighter. "You concealed the note from Talbot. You concealed the extent of your relationship." "With him?" She swallowed hard. I didn't have a choice." "There is always a choice," Wolfe said sharply. "You lied to me. You endangered this household. You may have contributed to a man's death." Rhonda's voice came out in a croak. "I was in love with him." Silence, heavy enough to flatten furniture. I thought... She shook her head miserably. I thought if I kept quiet I could protect him. And now? She lifted her tear-streaked face. Now I know he was using me. There was no triumph in Wolfe's expression, only cold, clinical acknowledgement. You are then a fool rather than a knave. That is something. He folded his hands. Gentlemen, he said, you will make full statements to Inspector Kramer, who is presently en route here. That got their attention. Lou cursed under his breath. Gina whimpered. Jack Varden looked ready to faint. You may do so voluntarily, Wolfe added, or you may wait until he extracts them by less pleasant means. There was a commotion at the door, Fritz admitting a bull-like figure in a crumpled brown suit, Inspector Kramer himself carrying the E. Permanent expression of a man who just stepped in something wet and sticky. He took one look at the gathering and scowled. What the hell, Wolfe? You running your own courtroom now? I have merely arranged the witnesses, Inspector, Wolfe said blandly. As a courtesy. Kramer snorted. Yeah, sure. Courtesy like a vulture offers a dying man, but he didn't argue. He pulled out his notebook and got to work. While Kramer herded the miserable trio into statements, Wolfe leaned back, closed his eyes, and finally relaxed. The house was cleansed. Order would return. Outside, rain began to patter against the windows, the city's version of a full stop. And me? I leaned against the wall, notebook tucked away, and thought about all the ways people twist themselves into knots, for money, for love, for fear. Rhonda May sat motionless, like she was afraid moving would break her completely. Maybe it would. Maybe it already had. By the time Kramer had squeezed statements out of Lou, Jack Varden, and Gina, it was almost 6 p.m. Fritz brought coffee, black and plentiful, and even Wolfe accepted a cup, which tells you how thoroughly the day had exhausted even him. When the door closed behind the last reluctant witness and Kramer stomped down the steps like a marching band on bad pavement, Wolfe stayed motionless behind his desk. His eyes were closed. His massive bulk looked carved from the same oak as his chair. I waited, hands in my pockets. I knew better than to rush him when he was assembling his thoughts. Finally he spoke. Archie. Still here. Gather them. It wasn't a request. It was the final act. I fetched Rhonda May from the front room, where she'd been curled into herself like a broken toy. Saul Panzer, Fred Durkin, and Ori Cather drifted back in silently, ghosts with pockets full of dirty secrets they had dug, up on Wolfe's orders. Even Fritz abandoned the kitchen to stand stiffly by the door, arms crossed. The brownstone had gone from fortress to battleground to courtroom. Wolfe opened his eyes, slow and deliberate, like a volcano deciding whether it was time to erupt. I have, he said, assembled the truth. Rhonda looked at him with wide, exhausted eyes. Saul, Fred, and Ori stood motionless, ready to act if anyone bolted. Wolfe sipped his coffee, that small, civilized motion, and began. The robbery at Glennie's diner was no accident of opportunity. It was premeditated. Victor Talbot, in collusion with Jack Varden, orchestrated it. They arranged the timing, the backdoor access, and the knowledge that Miss May's shift would end early, leaving the diner minimally staffed. He shifted his gaze slightly. Miss May's error, her dangerous foolishness, was twofold. First, in recognizing Talbot and saying nothing, she provided him an unwarranted alibi of obscurity. Second, she believed she was protecting a man who loved her, when in fact she was safeguarding a man prepared to discard her without compunction. Rhonda's mouth trembled. She said nothing. Wolfe continued, implacable. After the robbery, Talbot intended to vanish, but greed, or perhaps panic, led him to a second, riskier enterprise, the jewelry store theft. He succeeded, temporarily, but left witnesses and evidence, a beat, And then, Wolfe said, voice dropping slightly, the violence escalated. The jewelry store manager was murdered, not by Talbot. That brought every head up. Talbot himself, Wolfe said, was no longer useful to his co-conspirators. His visibility endangered them. His continued freedom posed a threat. He steepled his fingers. So Jack Varden arranged for Talbot's removal. Rhonda gasped softly. Even Saul raised an eyebrow. Wolfe smiled grimly. It was Varden who tipped off. The killers, likely through an intermediary, perhaps Lou Lemke or the man you know as Grey Suit. Talbot was eliminated to secure silence. "And the suitcase?" I asked, needing it on the record. Wolfe inclined his head. Talbot, knowing the treachery he faced, prepared a ledger. Names, dates, details. He entrusted it foolishly to Miss May, hiding it in the note, the coriander jar, perhaps even elsewhere. When our adversaries learned of this possible evidence, they panicked. He leaned forward, weight shifting like a great ship at harbor. The suitcase was stolen under the mistaken belief that the ledger was concealed therein. It was not. He pointed, a slow movement that skewered Rhonda like a pin to Sir Butterfly. Miss May kept the true secret, the note, in her possession until fear compelled her to seek assistance. But by then, the damage was done. I could feel the tension crackling through the room. Fritz's knuckles whitened on the back of the chair. Rhonda sat motionless, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Wolfe's voice softened, not from pity but precision. "You were used, Miss May. Talbot exploited your loyalty. Varden leveraged your silence. Gina obeyed out of fear. Lemke operated from blind loyalty to his employer. And all of them underestimated two things: the inevitability of conscience and my indignation at disorder." He shifted back into his chair fully now, like a judge concluding sentencing. "Inspector Kramer has what he requires. Arrests will follow. Trials will proceed. You, Miss May, will testify fully and truthfully, or you shall face perjury charges that will ensure your life is spent in institutional care." Rhonda nodded dumbly. Wolfe closed his eyes, signaling that, for him, the matter was over. After a moment, I cleared my throat. "Boss?" His eyes cracked open. "What about the ledger? The names, the evidence? We only have that one crumpled note." Wolfe smiled faintly. "Archie. When fools act in panic, they destroy their own shelter. The ledger was likely in Talbot's possession when he died, and now lost or burned by those who silenced him. The note was bait, nothing more." I let out a long breath. "And the diner?" Wolfe shrugged. "It will continue serving indifferent coffee to indifferent patrons, as all such places must." He reached for his beer with the casual certainty of a man who had once again wrestled chaos into order. Rhonda rose shakily. Fritz, in a gesture more mercy than manners, escorted her to the guest room for the night. Saul, Fred, and Ori departed quietly, leaving the house heavy with a new, cleaner silence. I stood by the fireplace, feeling the way the pressure had drained out of the place, leaving only the familiar scent of orchids and old wood polish. Wolfe, beer in hand, glanced at me. "Archie." "Yeah?" "Humans," he said, "will endure a betrayal more easily than they will endure boredom. It is an appalling flaw," I grinned. "Sure, keeps us in business." He grunted, a sound that might have been approval, and lifted his beer. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets gleamed under the lights, clean for a little while. Inside, dinner would soon be served. The brownstone was restored. And I, Archie, Goodwin, was ready for whatever fresh foolishness tomorrow might bring. When morning rolled around, the brownstone was back to being what it was always supposed to be, a place of calm, predictable order, where nothing more dangerous than Fritz's carving knife or my typewriter threatened to disturb the peace. The paper came late, but that was fine. We already knew the headlines. Diner robbery tied to murder, the Gazette declared in bold. Below it, the usual assortment of facts twisted through the meat grinder of editorial imagination. The robbery, the jewelry store heist, the murder of Archie, the night manager, and the subsequent arrests of Jack Varden, Lou Lemke, and a man now identified as Francis Greysuit Milner. The press didn't mention Rhonda May by name, which was a mercy. Wolfe had made sure of that by leaning, quietly, but firmly on Kramer. Public disgrace wasn't something Wolfe doled out lightly, unless the target had earned it with special flair. Rhonda left the brownstone just after breakfast, clutching a brown paper bag Fritz had packed with sandwiches and a jar of Fritz's legendary pickles. Saul drove her to the district attorney's office to begin the long, slow process of unwinding her part in the mess. Whether the law would be lenient or simply plow over her on its way to the bigger fish remained to be seen. Wolfe didn't bother coming downstairs to see her off. He hated goodbyes even more than he hated unexpected guests. After the door closed behind her, the house felt bigger somehow. Emptier. Like a theater after the final curtain falls and the last audience member shuffles out into the night. I found Wolfe in the plant rooms, of course. He was standing in the tropical section, his hands tucked behind his back, studying a delicate cattleya that had bloomed out of season. He didn't turn when I came in. "She's gone," I said. "Good," Wolfe replied. "You don't think she deserved a farewell?" He made a sound in his throat halfway between a grunt and a growl. "She deserved to survive," and he said, "I have no further obligations." I leaned against the doorframe. "You could have turned her out the minute you found out she lied. You didn't." "I dislike waste," Wolfe said. "She was salvageable." I let that sit a minute. "And Talbot?" I asked. "You think they'll ever find his body?" Wolfe shrugged. "Possibly. If his killers lacked imagination, otherwise, no. And if not, then justice," Wolfe said, "will have to remain an imperfect business." He said it without much regret. Wolfe never expected the world to behave well, only that he could control his piece of it. I left him to the orchids and went downstairs to the office. It felt good to open a clean notebook to a fresh page. The phone rang around noon. It was Kramer, naturally. "Goodwin," he barked. "Tell Wolfe he was right about the ledger." "Oh, they found it," Kramer said. "Burned. What was left of it was stuffed in an oil drum behind that dive bar Lemke liked. Any names still readable?" "A few. Enough to widen the net. Enough to make me miss my lunch today, so thank your boss." "For that?" I chuckled. "He'll be thrilled." Kramer hung up before I could return the favor. I got up, crossed to the kitchen, and found Fritz decapitating a stubborn head of romaine with surgical precision. "Lunch?" I asked. He nodded. "Roast beef, sandwiches, Bavarian potato salad, and a pecan tart for dessert." My stomach applauded the news. I carried the plates into the dining room where Wolfe was already waiting, freshly shaven, wearing a brown silk shirt and a darker expression. He ate in silence for the first few minutes, demolishing a roast beef sandwich with the concentration of a chess grandmaster, studying an endgame. Finally, midway through his second helping of potato salad, he spoke. "Archie, sir. Did you find the conduct of our guests yesterday instructive?" I smiled around a forkful of salad. "Instructive? Sure, like a termite infestation teaches you about wood." Wolfe snorted. "It might have been a laugh. The human appetite," he said, setting down his fork, "is infinite not merely for survival, but for self-destruction." "Heavy," I said. "You want some coffee to wash that down?" He waved me off. "Later." He leaned back, dabbing his lips with a linen napkin. "Miss May," he said, "chose affection over reason. Varden chose ambition over loyalty. Lemke chose loyalty over prudence. Gina chose fear over courage. Talbot, he grimaced, chose greed over all. Nobody made good choices, I said. Except us, Wolfe said, reaching for his beer. We chose order over chaos. He lifted the glass in a lazy toast to himself and sipped. I took that as my cue to dig into the pecan tart Fritz had plated, like it was going on exhibit. As I chewed, I thought about Wolfe's little summation. He wasn't wrong. Every poor sap tangled up in Talbot's schemes had made their own bed. Some would pay heavier prices than others. Some already had. Wolfe never expected fairness from life, only patterns. And when the patterns snapped too far from sense, he set them right. That was what he did, and why people paid him more than they paid their doctors, priests, and lawyers combined. When lunch wrapped up, Wolfe retreated upstairs for his sacred afternoon orchid session. I cleaned up the dining room, whistling under, my breath feeling pretty good about the world. Sure, it wasn't perfect. The scum never stayed down for long. There would always be another Victor Talbot, another Rhonda May, another grubby little plan hatched in the shadows. But in the meantime, the brownstone was clean, the orchids were blooming, Fritz was plotting dinner, and Nero Wolfe was satisfied, and, as long as Wolfe was satisfied, the universe, or at least our corner of it, could limp along a little longer. Outside, the city carried on, horns honking, people rushing, deals being made and broken every second. Inside, all was calm. Now and if it didn't stay that way, well, I had a clean notebook, a sharp pencil, and my best suit pressed. Let chaos try us again. We were ready. It was late afternoon when the final threads of our case came together. The rain had stopped earlier in the day, leaving the streets slick and gleaming like the polished wood of Wolfe's desk. Inside the brownstone, everything was exactly as it should be, quiet, methodical, and for once calm. Wolfe had spent the last few hours perched in his usual chair, his eyes half-lidded in thought, running through the endless permutations of evidence in that labyrinthine mind of his. He wasn't one for easy victories or superficial conclusions. He made them count. And I knew, despite my own desire to stretch out the thrill of solving a mystery, that the moment had arrived. Rhonda May had left us a few hours earlier, now on her way to the district attorney's office. Her role in the mess was done. The rest of it, the theft, the murders, the lies, were now someone else's problem. Her testimony would be crucial, but there was no sense in thinking of her as anything other than another small human casualty in a game of much larger players. As I leaned against the doorframe, I watched Wolfe finish his fourth beer. His face, as usual, was unreadable, but his thoughts were miles away in some quiet corner of the world where only he could follow them. After a moment he glanced up at me, eyes sharp, as though he had been waiting for me to speak. "Archie," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "are you satisfied?" I hesitated. "About Rhonda?" "About the case," Wolfe corrected, setting his beer aside. He always did this. Made you believe you were talking about something small and inconsequential, when really the stakes were far higher. "I suppose so," I said. "The right people are going to jail. Talbot's dead, Varden's finished, and Gina gets to be left alone. Everything's been cleaned up." "You have no curiosity, Archie," he said, with a wry, knowing smile. "You are satisfied, because the surface has been scraped clean. But the roots of the case are much deeper." I blinked. "I don't follow." Wolfe tapped his fingers together, eyes narrowing. "The one thing you have missed, Archie, is the reason why. Why Talbot felt compelled to escalate his operations so drastically. Why Miss May became involved at all. And why the others, Varden, Lemke, and Gina, were so terrified of his betrayal." My mind immediately started piecing things together. The missing details had been there all along, small, subtle hints that only someone like Wolfe would pick up on. I sat up straighter. "You're saying it wasn't just about the money?" I asked. "No, it was never just about the money." Wolfe leaned forward slightly, his gaze focused like a hawk spotting its prey. It was about control. Talbot was no mere robber. He was building an empire of manipulation, a network of debt, loyalty, and blackmail. He played on fear, on loyalty. That's what he was after. And Miss May was his unwitting pawn in all of this. I ran my hand through my hair. But how could she not have known? She was so wrapped up in him. Exactly, Wolfe interrupted. Her love blinded her to the reality of his intentions. But Talbot made a mistake. He underestimated her intelligence, and he overestimated his ability to control her. Once she began to question him, once she understood the implications of his actions, she became dangerous, not to him directly, but to his empire of lies. I stared at him, realization dawning. So when she lied about recognizing Talbot at the diner, it wasn't just to protect him. It was to protect herself. Wolfe nodded once. Yes, Talbot's network was already vast. If she had exposed him, she would have become a target, as would anyone close to her. The fear, the loyalty, those were the strings he pulled. But she made one fatal mistake. She thought she could escape him by lying, and in doing so, she locked herself deeper into his web. I sat back, feeling the weight of it all settle around me. And Varden, he was Talbot's ally all along? Wolfe's lips curled into a thin smile. Varden was opportunistic. He saw the financial potential, and when Talbot promised him a share of the spoils, he jumped at it. But once Talbot began to unravel, Varden became nervous. His loyalty was to the money, not to Talbot. When he realized how deep the rabbit hole went, he tried to sever ties. I ran my fingers across the desk, trying to absorb the enormity of Wolfe's deductions. So in the end, Varden thought the best way out was to kill Talbot. Correct. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. But like most men who think they can control fate, Varden miscalculated. Talbot had already outlived his usefulness. Varden had no idea how quickly the walls would close in. I shook my head. A classic case of greed leading to chaos. Wolfe paused, considering. Not just greed. Fear, too. It clouds the mind. It drives men to make desperate decisions. There was a long silence. I could feel the weight of Wolfe's reflections pressing down on the room. A reminder of the complexities that lay beneath every crime, every decision, and every person who thought they could outwit the inevitable. You know, Wolfe, I said finally, sometimes it feels like all the puzzle pieces are fitting together, only to reveal a bigger mess. A lot of lives ruined, a lot of people caught in a cycle they didn't fully understand. And the worst part, Wolfe interrupted, is that they all believed they had control over it. They didn't. I nodded, recognizing that the real solution, the true unraveling, was never in the arrest, never in the confession. It was in seeing the bigger picture, the invisible threads that tied them all together, despite their efforts to untangle themselves. So, what now? I asked. Everything's sorted. Rhonda's out of the woods, Talbot's gone, and the rest of them are behind bars. Wolfe took a long pause before speaking again. Now, Archie, we return to our lives. You with your perpetual curiosity, me with my orchids. Some problems solve themselves. Others linger longer, waiting for someone else to deal with. I leaned, back in my chair, reflecting. The world was still as messy as ever, but the brownstone felt like an island of quiet in the middle of it all. Wolfe had done what he always did. He brought order out of chaos, intellect out of confusion. And you, Wolfe? I asked. Satisfied with the outcome? Wolfe's lips twitched in the slightest of smiles. Satisfaction is for lesser minds, Archie. For me, the only satisfaction is in the work, the process, and of course the beer. I laughed softly, knowing better than to ask for more than that from Nero Wolfe. The case was over. Justice had been done in its own peculiar way. Life would go on with all its flaws, contradictions, and unforeseen consequences. But for now, for this brief moment, everything was as it should be.